In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to live in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife was Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah, and they went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech died, and Naomi was left with her sons. Her sons took 2 Moabite wives. One was named Orpah, and if you want to know where Oprah Winfrey's name comes from, it's that her mom got the spelling wrong. But Orpah. And the other one's name is, you will not be shocked to learn, Ruth. And since the name of the book is Ruth, we know who to pay attention to as we go along here. Famine, migration, family on the brink of extinction. But by the end of the story, we're going to have redemption, marriage, and the birth of a family destined for royalty. Maybe you heard the name of that town in Judah. It's a story, though, of the many devastating losses in the life of Naomi and her eventual restoration to a rich, full life. All of this transformation that happens for Naomi is made possible, comes because of the remarkable Hesed, faithfulness of Ruth. What we see here, what we will be seeing here this morning, is what Michael Card has offered us as one definition of Hesed. When the one from whom we have no right to expect anything gives us everything. Both Mahlon and Chilion died so that the woman was left without her 2 sons or her husbands. Now, this is what happens under the opening credits. This is the setup. This is happening under the opening credits. We watch Elimelech and his wife and his sons leave Judah because of the famine. They go to Moab. There are foreigners there, which means they probably had a rocky welcome, but they did well enough to survive long enough for the boys to marry wives. Now, in most Middle Eastern culture, there were 2 directives about foreigners. One is foreigners are foreigners. They're not insiders. Keep that in mind. But also, there was an expectation of hospitality for foreigners. In fact, there was a kind of culture that said if you invite someone into your home to have a meal with them, they are now family, and you have the same obligations to them as you have to anybody else. That'll teach you to invite people home for dinner. But death and destruction follow them, and we end up with 3 widows. Now, widows are unbelievably vulnerable. In fact, they still are. It's really only been probably the last couple of 100 years that widows are less vulnerable than they used to be. But even in most places, women needed men, and certainly in Middle Eastern culture. And Naomi is in Moab. Her relatives are in Judah. Her daughters-in-law are Moabites. What is she going to do? Because now there's no one to protect them. They need a brother, an uncle, sons, father, and they're all dead, or they're in the wrong place for them. Women cannot survive without men. That still happens. I read a story just the other day about a woman for whom some law changed, and she was forced to take on sex work as the only way she could support her family. And these 3 women are in much the same position. They can become beggars, they can become prostitutes, or they can lay down and die. However, Naomi does have family in Judah, and by verse 7, this is still during the opening credits. By verse 7, she sets out for her homeland. Now, before we get to this really big deal here. It's the big deal here is in 1:16. I want to tell you a little something. Naomi goes back to her family because this is core to the way she believes the world works. Everyone in that society at that time understood you want to be buried with your ancestors. It is really important to be buried with your ancestors, because that's where you're going to spend eternity until the resurrection, which is why the cost of being buried in Israel really close to the Golden Gate, you can see pictures of loads and loads of these graves, is because that's where the resurrection is going to happen first, and they're the closest to it. But we even see a sense of that now when we want to rescue people. We know they're dead, they've been crushed by a building. Our military go back for the bodies of their brothers and sisters. They don't leave them on the battlefield. That it's important to be, even for us, to be buried in a place that feels like home. Now, this is key to their identity. It's really hard to understand the depth of how this is in them because it's 3,000 years later. But this is where we come to this story, because here's where we're going to see where Hesed lives in this story. We're going to see what happens when a foreigner, Ruth, the Moabite, embraces the God of Hesed, presumably because she sees or senses something in Naomi. Or perhaps it was her husband. We're going to hear one of the Bible's most beautiful poems of love. Then Naomi started to return with her daughters-in-law from the country of Moab. For she had heard in the country of Moab that the Lord had considered his people back home in Judah and given them food. Famine is over. It's safe to go back. But they'd been there a while. So she set out from the place where she'd been living, and she and her two daughters-in-law, and they went on their way to go back to the land of Judah. But Naomi stops and says to her daughters-in-law, "There's nothing for you in Judah. You should go home to your mothers where you can find husbands. Because I can't provide more sons for you. I'm too old. Even if I got married and pregnant tonight, what are you going to do? Wait until they're old enough to be? So I can't help you. There's nothing I can do for you. Go back to your mothers." And they sob and say, no, they're not going to go. But, Naomi said, "Look, this is my bitterness. The Lord has turned away from me, but not you." When life takes a hard turn, it can be hard to maintain your spiritual connection. They wept aloud again. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. So Naomi said, "Look, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and her gods, her people and her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Don't press me to leave you or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God." That is a really huge statement. Where you die, I will die. There will I be buried. This is an unbelievable commitment. May the Lord do thus and so to me, and more as well, even if death parts me from you. Now, from here on out, we're going to be caught up in the, oh my gosh, what's going to happen now? We've got 4 more chapters to go. There's going to be a twist, of course. Will it be a happy ending? How do we know? In chapter 2, Naomi and Ruth find their way back to their homeland, and Ruth tells Naomi she's going out to glean in the field. Gleaning is when you go pick up what's left over after the harvest. Jewish tradition has, and the tradition of that time has, literally this is where it comes from, cutting corners. You were supposed to cut corners so that there'd be some grain left around. Gleaning is what the people who are so poor, they don't even have the job of harvesting grain, that's where they get food. Because they can't buy it, so they glean. Now, like lots of places even now, but certainly then, a young woman who is out in the field gleaning is tremendously vulnerable. This happens in some other places around our world too. Women are regularly, often, consistently raped in the fields. And it's just part of the culture. And it's a sign of their desperation that Naomi permits her daughter-in-law to do this, because it's dangerous. Enter Boaz. Boaz, who is a wealthy kinsman of Naomi's, and kinsmen have certain obligations. He notices Ruth and inquires about her. And this is not as seedy as it sounds. He finds out what she has done for his kinswoman, Naomi, and so he takes steps to protect her while she's gleaning. It's really interesting that he even notices, but apparently a stranger, probably a pretty young stranger. I've ordered the young men not to bother you, he says. So now, if something happens to her in the field, somebody's going to lose their job and it won't be her. That's the kind of line we overlook. It doesn't jump out at us, but he has taken a huge step to manage his workforce to protect this woman from what she had every reason to simply expect. From one from whom Ruth has no right to expect anything. He gives her everything. He goes further. He gives her permission to go drink the water that is provided for his workers. And that's simply unheard of for the gleaners. The gleaners mostly try to stay out of the way. And when Ruth questions him about why he's doing this, he says that the Lord, through him, is rewarding her for her Hesed to Naomi. Ruth surely must have witnessed the Hesed of Naomi and to Naomi's gods. She must have been treated with Hesed by her husband. And she behaves according to the laws of Hesed. Not the laws of her own people, not the laws of the culture she grew up in, not her gods, but the God of Naomi. And this chain of Hesed opens the heart of Boaz. This is how God works, the story says. Now, eventually the plot blossoms. And it sounds like it's a bit of a romance. It's not really a romance. Boaz has an obligation to take care of her, and it's a complicated kind of cultural process, but he has an obligation to marry the widow of one of his kinsmen. That you may have read about that in the Bible, other places. So he knows he has this obligation, but Naomi and Ruth also know that he has a pretty good reason to not fulfill that obligation because he's very much older than her. And he doesn't want to be a father again. But she needs to have a man who will give her a child, because a child cements her place in the culture and presumably would be a son who would grow up and take care of her. But Naomi, who knows that Ruth needs more security than she can give, she also knows Boaz is rich. She also knows Boaz is one of her kin. What she doesn't know is what kind of a person he is. She doesn't know that yet. So she tells Ruth to wash up, put on something pretty, anoint herself with fragrant oil, and then watch for where Boaz goes to lie down after he's finished eating and drinking. Everybody's out in the fields. It's harvest time. So people are eating and drinking at the end of the harvest in the evening, and then they just grab their cloak and they curl up somewhere and go to sleep. And then Naomi says, "Uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." Uncover his feet and lie down. This is the part I was telling you about. Feet is a euphemism frequently used in the Bible for lower extremities. And he will tell you what to do means he'll either say, "I don't know what you're doing here, get out of my bed," or he will cover you with his cloak, which is a proposal and a commitment of marriage. Ruth, with her mother-in-law's encouragement, does something that most of us would be horrified at. She offers herself to Boaz with this slim hope that he will not only take her offer, but that he will be upstanding. He will be a son of the God of Hesed and marry her. And he is, and he does. I find this to be one of the most touching stories in the Bible. It's been a favorite of mine for decades. It's a folk tale. It's not history, but it's more true to life than many of the stories in the Bible about battles or priests or prophets. The day-to-day lives of most humans, for most of human history, have been on the edge of illness, on the edge of starvation, on the edge of death, on the edge of neglect. And yet the Hebrews have put their trust in a God of Hesed even when things are not going well. We talked about this some last week. You can check out sermons on our website and you can hear about God in a time of desperation from last week. And Ruth has been drawn to Naomi because of her faith in a God of Hesed, and even without the benefit of being part of the covenant. She's not Jewish. She is not a Hebrew. She does not belong to the community, the covenant with Yahweh. But she displays the steadfast love that is at the heart of Hesed anyway. And because this is a good story, Boaz is also a man of God. These are the people who are the children of the God of Hesed. And this is what it looks like when they act with Hesed. In this story, what we see is that loving kindness is not an emotion. This is not how we feel in our heart. It's not whether someone's misfortune causes us to feel compassionate or feel judgmental or any of the other gazillion feelings we might have. It's a story about how we behave. And that's tricky enough to know how to help, when to help in a way that doesn't hurt, right? That's a whole other conversation. But there is a strong ethical dimension to Hesed: faithfulness, loyalty, care, kindness, mercy, forgiveness. This is grace. When the one from whom we have no right to expect anything gives us everything. And by the way, Ruth and Boaz do have a child, and if you want to know where that goes, check the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 1, verse 5. God hardly appears in the book of Ruth and is not an active character in the story. We hear no revelations, we see no miracles, but God is unmistakably present, don't you think? Unmistakably present. This story is what God looks like. This is God's story too. And it's clear that God's story only advances through people. God's story advances through people. If there is going to be Hesed in this world, you must bring it. When we are faithful to the ones we're stuck with, whether we like them or not, Naomi and Ruth were faithful to one another. It serves as a reminder of the God who is stuck with all of us and remains faithful to us, but is stuck to us, stuck with us. You know, I hope you can see it. None of this redemption, none of this transformation happens outside community. This is not something happening to one person in a cave in the desert. This is not happening to someone sitting in a pew in church. This is happening in the everyday experiences, the all too common experiences of everyday people who live their lives mostly right at the edge. It happens among us, and it happens through us, and it happens because of us, and it happens for us. This, right here, and in your homes, and in your hearts, and in our community, this is where Hesed lives. And today, we share a meal rich with Hesed. I am so glad you're here.